Hey everyone, welcome to Taking the Pulse, a healthcare and life sciences video podcast. I am Heather Hoops Matthews here in South Carolina in the studio with Maynard Nexsen healthcare attorney Matthew Roberts. Matthew, hello.
Hello.
And we are joined by Lauren DeMoss, another Maynard Nexsen healthcare attorney. She is in Alabama. Lauren, good to see you.
Thanks, Heather. Great to see you.
I am sort of excited for this episode because I am going to cut these two lawyers loose on artificial intelligence. It has been a topic in almost every episode that we've had on recently, somehow, to my surprise, actually. And I know there are a lot of legal questions and questions that clients have, and you guys are going to talk about them. Matthew, but first, just give me how is AI? What's it look like in healthcare?
It's everywhere, potentially. It's in the nature of the relationship between a provider and their data, how the data is stored, how the data is used. It's in potential acquisitions when you do due diligence. It's in clinical research. It's prevalent throughout the healthcare and life sciences industry. And that's why we are focusing on it and have Lauren taking the lead on our team on helping us manage some of these AI issues as they come in healthcare and life sciences.
Lauren, that's a tall order.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, because, as Matthew mentioned, it's really showing up in so many different ways. And we've seen that from the different guests we've talked to over the last several months. It's showing up in terms of kind of, data use and what that looks like when two entities are kind of, entering into an agreement and there's an issue with respect to, how someone wants to use the data, or if you're someone providing the data, how someone else wants to use it. And oftentimes now we're seeing very specific provisions about the development of AI and how that's being used. And I think it's showing up in the clinical kind of piece too, using AI to predict, to diagnose, to potentially treat. So yes, it is a very tall order, and there's lots of issues out there. And fortunately or unfortunately, right now, I think there are a lot of unanswered questions from a regulatory perspective.
Right. And Lauren, one of the things we do as healthcare lawyers, we do a lot of contract review, contract negotiation, contract drafting. So AI has presented a unique opportunity and challenge in the sense that when we think about a contract where we're doing for a client, we have to now think about the artificial intelligence implications to it and address it in the contract. So how are you seeing that come up in your contractual negotiations and the projects you're working on for clients?
Yeah, Matthew, I'm seeing that all the time now. And, it's interesting when you think about, well, no one thinks about this except me, but when you think about kind of the evolution of the business associate agreement over time, and, you kind of had your very basic business associate agreement that folks didn't pay any attention to at all. Then high tech came out, and then folks started paying a little more attention to business associate agreements. And then, really over the last kind of 5 years or so, what those look like now have changed so much, and there's new pieces to it. There's data use agreements, there's security addendums, but really what we've been seeing over the last, especially I'd say 6 to 9 months, is layered on top of all your kind of, if you're the entity providing the data, if you're a covered entity, and you're looking at what's going to happen with your PHI, what we're seeing now layered on top of all the typical kind of HIPAA, security and privacy restrictions is, this idea of, if you want to de-identify my data, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to take it now? And do you want, is there kind of an explicit permission to use it and use it for the development of AI? And we're seeing that a lot. And obviously we can see it from both sides. We have, as I mentioned, the covered entity side of things, where you have maybe a third party vendor who's wanting to take your data. They're wanting to de-identify it and use it to develop some sort of AI platform product that, ultimately could be beneficial to you as the covered entity, but they're still wanting to take your data. And there, the concerns are kind of twofold. You can be concerned with, the privacy and security of them, the vendor kind of taking your data and wanting to do more with it, therefore keeping it longer, maintaining it longer, although it is, quote, kind of de-identified. And then you have the issue of, if you're a covered entity, you might want to look at your own development of AI. And do you want to give away, all your data if you're looking maybe to take some of that information and develop some sort of, diagnostic or AI tools yourself. So there's kind of not only a data ownership issue, but then an issue with if someone's going to be developing AI, who owns in the end. And then on the other side, if you're a vendor and you're negotiating these agreements, you want kind of very broad data use allowances in the agreement that lets you take de-identified information and use it for the development of AI. And we're, there's definitely a struggle and a negotiation point in contracts now, looking at, if you want to use it for the development of AI, how explicit does the agreement need to be in terms of using it kind of for any lawful purpose and using it for the development of AI, and what that means, longer term. So, that's a long way of answering your question, but it's certainly become a very big issue in terms of contract negotiation, especially when there's large amounts of data to be shared or used.
Yeah, it's a whole new provision that the industry is in the process of developing, and almost all healthcare contracts that involve the transfer or potential use of data. And let's talk about, there are specific contracts that deal with the use of data, where someone is needing it for billing or whatever else. And so as a byproduct of having that data, there could be a desire to use AI associated with it, even if it's billing or coding or whatever. Have you seen a resistance to that request by our clients to put some parameters on it? Or have you seen some suggested language from the other side saying, hey, we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to do it, trying to be proactively addressing the issue?
We've seen it both ways, Matthew. You really have. We've seen, I think, more on kind of the vendor type, the clients that want to take the information and use it for the development of AI. The thought process being, let's just be really explicit. Here's kind of the provision that says, we get it, and here's what we're going to do with it. And that there being no question, right? Because really the issue, and this, the issue being, we've got the HIPAA kind of framework.
Right.
You've got, a few kind of state laws sitting out there. We obviously have states with privacy framework, but I mean, state laws that are specific to AI. So there's really no kind of, here's how we're told that this provision or that these contracts need to look like. We just, other than a framework that we've been working under for years, there's really no kind of guidance out there that would dictate, what exactly those provisions in a contract need to say. And so that makes it interesting, but also difficult.
Now, do you think the indemnifications and things like that provisions will apply to the downstream use of AI that creates some type of issue for someone in a contract? I mean, is that another thing that gets added to the AXA or omissions of a party in an agreement?
It certainly does. I mean, I think when you think about the data use, and despite any sort of assurances, it's going to be de-identified or it's not, or, you just think of longer term risk potentially. And, I think there are some protections there just when you do de-identify it, obviously. But yes, I mean, I think when you're looking at, use of the data and it being explicit that it stops there, if we provide the data, but then you go on to create the AI, that we don't have any, liability there. But yes, I mean, we see it, I speak in terms of a kind of provision in the agreement that's specific to the AI use, but you're right. I mean, those issues kind of permeate all parts of the contract, other parts, the indemnification and other areas that now that that's on the table just naturally come into play.
So we're having some more federal regulatory guidance on how to deal with it from the agencies, but they're going to be state law, as we talked about before we got on the podcast. There will be states that address and restricts the use of AI, which is going to be problematic because it's going to be embedded into either a software or service program. But are you trying to, in your contracts, to be very proactive in saying, well, if you use it, it can only be used in X, and then I get the benefit of it? How far or do you see people going in restricting the use of AI in contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little industry specific, obviously. And as you kind of talked about at the onset of the episode, there's lots of different ways you can use AI. If it's utilization review, if it's trying to kind of predict, trends, that's one thing. But if you're talking about using it to train some sort of model for the diagnosis of X, that kind of takes on a whole different, that to me, that seems much different than kind of utilization review, trying to look at trends and those kind of platforms. So I think one of the issues we're seeing is from the state law side, trying to regulate what this looks like has been a little industry and almost provider specific in some cases, looking at a specific, like by way example, the long-term care industry, or looking at, behavioral health, another example. So it can just come from so many different angles that if you think about, what might be on the horizon from a regulatory framework perspective, it's going to be, not some sort of comprehensive, AI law that says you can use it for X, but you can't use it for Y. I think it's going to be more in the behavioral health setting. You can use it for this. And that's what we kind of have to keep a watch for when, you're drafting contract provisions that basically say, you can use it for any purpose. I think the person, the entity that wants the information to create AI, the burden is going to be on them to keep up with those state laws and know kind of when that they can use it up to a certain
Right.
point.
I'll tell you, one of the things that worries me about its use is in the reimbursement world. If a payer uses AI to track and issue denials, so it's no longer utilization review by a clinician. It can be done via software through AI, and that creates a whole nother contractual, legal, and business level of risk that we haven't had to deal with before.
Yeah, and Matthew, we've had some guests talk about that, kind of the world of data that you're using to train a particular AI. So to your
Right.
point, when you're talking about denials and, if you have some sort of platform or product that's been trained to recognize, but the data set they've used is limited or not large enough. I mean, there's, I think Jonathan talked about it a couple months ago, that the big concern and issue is the gaps potentially and
Right.
what's being used to train it. And that's the push-pull too on the contract side, because you want all the data you can get, but then you've got, big kind of holders of data when you think about your large providers, large health insurers, that maybe are a little more reluctant to share, a lot of data. Then you could potentially have gaps in the,
Sure.
kind of analyses that the AI
And you would never know those gaps exist if you're
right.
in certain situations.
Yeah. And they even talk about too, and again, I think we've had guests talk about, gaps in geographic scope, in terms of, maybe they have a lot of, data on someone in the Midwest, but nothing from anyone in the Southeast, or, just when you're looking at training things, especially in the clinical diagnostic setting, there's some concerns there, obviously.
Well, you referenced to the intellectual property ownership of who owns this AI, and who owns the data that goes in the AI. How are you seeing that addressed by your healthcare clients?
That is a big issue. And we've looked at kind of, or helped create kind of joint development type agreements, where, there's kind of shared ownership of the AI, and those are sticky and they're difficult. And then I should disclaim that I'm not an IP lawyer. But
But we do use them when these issues
correct.
come up.
Yes, correct. And maybe next episode we need to have
Yeah.
them on, Matthew, to kind of talk through these too. But there's also kind of the escrow agreement, in terms of holding, if there is some sort of source code that's kind of the linchpin of the AI development, and if you're jointly developing, where's that held? Who kind of gets rights to it? What if the relationship goes sour? All those issues are coming up and have to be looked at. And I think we tell folks it is so important to kind of spend the time and resources to look at it at the onset of any sort of kind of joint development type relationship, because
For sure. Yeah.
and it's like most contractual relationships, if things go sour down the road, it's, but when you have kind of, who owns what, there's lots of issues that can come into play.
Well, there ought to be a checklist when you're talking about rolling out or using, either developing or using another person's AI. There should be a checklist that our clients go through to just confirm from their operational and business perspective, who owns it, how is it used, how are we managing this, and then talk to someone like you to get that into a representative agreement, so there's less confusion down the road.
And I think underscore that, Matthew, too, that, having kind of a especially entities that are either, heavily engaged in the development of AI or have large data sets that are wanting to be used for it. Our IP group has helped folks with kind of development of AI policies, where they kind of, to your point, they have kind of a checklist, or they have a way that they vet and they look at things, and these parameters have to be in place if we're gonna, share the data or look at the data. So that, having kind of an AI organizational policy, I think is something that, is being done.
Another issue that we've dealt with on the team is how do we use AI in delivering our legal services to clients. And we had one of our younger lawyers, gosh, this was 2 years ago. I asked him to write an article on ChatGPT, the developing, this is over 2 years ago. And he gives me the article, and he said, I want to sit here and watch you read it. And it was short. And I read it, and I'm like, did ChatGPT write this article? He said, yes, it did. And so that was his point to me, was you don't have to write about it, because it's writing itself, and it's growing and learning, and which is a little bit spooky, but we are looking at different ways to use it. There are some, we're careful about it. We want to make sure that we're transparent, but it is you have kids in college and high school and middle school using artificial intelligence in their learning and in their providing reports and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's what are your thoughts on how we can use it? I know that's still an evolution in process.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at different, products and services, and kind of testing, what that looks like and how we can use it. And I think too, Matthew, that, we've touched on our clients, but, we've had questions about them using AI, like a physician group using ChatGPT, for certain things. And so we're getting those questions too. And, it's ChatGPT, I don't think is, anyway.
I had a non-lawyer friend of mine tell me, he said, well, look, I'm glad you're old now, because if you were young, you'd be out of business, because artificial intelligence is going to do all the legal work for people. And I'm like, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm not sure that people would want to turn over their key legal issues to artificial intelligence. But, that's certainly something that we'll have to evaluate as it progresses.
Yeah. I mean, I think that using it, goes back to, even in our industry and field, goes back to, does it have enough data to be appropriately trained? And do you have enough data from the jurisdiction you're asking it about? Or do you have enough data from the state? I think the platform being trained on the right kind of data is going to be the issue, just like it is in the healthcare industry for us too.
Well, I hate to say it, it sort of feels like the Wild West change in the healthcare industry, but I know you two will navigate it well. I appreciate just sort of the open-ended discussion that you guys had today. I have lots of questions, so when we're done here, Matthew, you're not leaving. For those of you who joined us today, I do hope this gave you more to think about with artificial intelligence and how it does impact the healthcare industry and just the changing nature of what's unfolding before us. Lauren, thank you for running point for the healthcare team on it for Maynard Nexsen. Matthew, good choice here. Yes. And stay put, because I've got more questions. We'll look forward to seeing you next time right here on Taking the Pulse, a healthcare and life sciences video podcast.